Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make decks as cheap and playable as possible, so if this is something you'd be interested in, then why not
subscribe.
Finally, I'm back with another video, and the reason why it took me so long is this terrifying card, Giant Ballpark. Running a field spell that where you have to run at least 3 bricks in your deck, and with Terraforming at 1, who would have thought that this wouldn't make a great deck anymore? Back in the days, this deck used to be like quite alrightish, at least like rogue-ish when it came out. But since then, a lot of stuff has happened. Obviously, power creep is a thing. Obviously, terraforming to 1 is a thing, and all of these decks that rely heavily on powerful field spells, where, you know, Konami had a phase where they just printed powerful field spells, and that is has come to an end with the end of terraforming at 3. So how do we salvage this? We play unnecessary crap like Planet Pathfinder. But first of all, we talk a bit about, well, the budget version of this, why I run more Ultra-Rares than it probably says in the title, and that is because we have 1 Ash Blossom, 1 Forbidden Droplet, and 1 Infinite Impermanence. Reason is these are in the free packs, well, the bundle packs that most of you will probably have purchased at one point. If you didn't, you probably should. Very good card. Also, in general, like 10 packs for 7 out of 50 gems is quite nice value, even though if it's just master packs. Other than that, obviously there's cards that you get for free, like Rasterliger, Link Spider if I'm not mistaken, LANphorhynchus. These cards you all get for free. So in the end, the deck is somewhat cheapish actually, and well, should you play this deck over normal Tenyi Swordsoul, even like a budget Tenyi Swordsoul variant? Probably not, because let's be honest, it's probably a lot worse. There's a lot of stuff in here that you would not want to run in any Swordsoul deck, and well, that for example is 3 level 4 normal insect monsters. But if you want to play a Giant Ballpark deck, this is probably one of the versions that gets you the closest to like a playable one, I guess. Mainly because Swordsoul and Tenyi stuff is going to do the trick. But also because it synergizes somewhat. Also, there's some anti-synergy, which I'll be talking about in a second. But this is the best playable version that I could make. Problematic is Giant Ballpark is kind of a deck that you have to build around this field spell, but also since you won't have this card in your hand most of the time, like not most of the time, but like you won't have it like every game, or not even every second game for that matter, because you only have like 7 copies at best. So you have to run kind of something else in this deck that also works as its own engine, as its own deck, to compensate for the fact if you don't draw a Giant Ballpark, then you can still actually do stuff. That is what I tried to do with this specific variant. We start off with a triple shiny Black Sea Squatter. This card is, well, that's nice. It's level 4, it has 2000 attack, that's fine. Sometimes actually less is more if you think about the Gokipole effect. Obviously, if this card has less attack, you can pop more monsters, but in the end, it's always this whole like, can you attack over it, can you not? Yeah, I feel like this card is probably the best, but you can obviously play whatever you want. And there's a cheeky kind of thing that you can do with this, which is you can run 1 Adhara, and then technically you could put in 1 Eteria Beast, because you have Planet Pathfinder and you have a shiny Black Sea Squatter, which are both level 4 Earth monsters. So with an Earth Tuner and non-Earth Tuner monster, you could obviously go into the whole Eteria Beast, which is still like a strong card, I'd say, especially in a format like Master Duel. Then we run hand traps, because going second is a pain in the ass these days, especially because, well, the meta has shifted so much with the new cards, and if you give your opponent like 1 inch, they are gonna rip you apart. So going second decks on a budget have a massive issue that all the cards that stop your opponents from doing their plays are ultra rares. That's just what it is. You can see here hand trap wise, you want to play stuff like possibly Nibiru, definitely stuff like Maxi. Yeah, it's all ultra rares, and you'll have to compensate this somehow, so at least want to include like the ones that you kind of get for free. I decided to run 1 Gokipole. I tried out multiple, but this card is another brick in your hand. It's nice if you send it to the graveyard one time with a Giant Ballpark. You could even send it to the graveyard with a Forbidden Droplet, or just normal summon it and link it off with the Tenyi stuff and go into Berserker of the Tenyi, for example. That works pretty fine. Then send 1 card to the graveyard and pop a monster. This is going second, can be quite nice. But I felt like you didn't need it more than once. Plus you have a way to recycle it, which I'll be talking about in a minute. So I think 1 is definitely fine, considering that the card doesn't do much by itself. we run a triple Planet Pathfinder. This deck doesn't need to normal summon all that much, so you can mainly get away with this, and even if you normal summon it and don't use its effect, you can still go into rank 4s with it, so it's not as terrible, and it kind of gets you into a Giant Ballpark, which can be very good since this is a ballpark deck, or at least it's meant to be. So yeah, I think triple Planet Pathfinder is fine in the end. Obviously you'd rather have stuff like Terraforming at 3, but we don't have that. Then we run the level 4 Tenyis that actually do stuff, which are the fire and the water one. The wind one is fine, but I felt like the whole lowering attack isn't that necessary, because you can usually get rid of most of the stuff by using some rank 4s and whatnot anyway. This card is quite good in the grind game as well, because your opponent constantly has to deal with your Berserker coming back, so this is quite nice. And Mapura at least protects it from targeting, which is, yeah, it's okay. It's not great, but it works from time to time, plus it's level 4, so that helps you go into rank 4s. We run one Swordsoul of Taia. If you have Moye, you probably want to run this card instead, because it's just more versatile, and you'll, at the start of the game, especially if you only draw this card and then you normal summon, you'd rather have like a worm monster in hand than in the graveyard, but by running so many Tenyis, it's quite likely that you will have one in the graveyard as well, and then this card is just a lot cheaper. Sending another worm to the graveyard doesn't really do all that much for a deck, even though you can obviously send stuff like Vishuda and it can come up, so it's not like it's a useless effect at all, but drawing another card is probably as useful, if not even more useful. And we run this card at 1 because we run 2 incredible Ecclesia. You technically could run 3, but then you kind of have to like bump this card up by 1 as well, because otherwise you start with 2 Ecclesias. And the thing is, why I run a lot of 2-offs in these specific decks is that a lot of the cards kind of do the same thing, but if they're on the same power level, but you draw 2 of the same one, then you cannot use both of them, so I'd rather just like draw 1 of them. And if they actually do the same, obviously you want to run your best cards at 3, but these I wouldn't class as your best cards, so I think 2 is fine. Also on a budget, and cutting down 1 of them is quite neat. I just was fed up that I constantly open with 2 of them in the hand, especially going second these days. You want to have every single card you in your hand wants to be doing stuff, especially if you run that many bricks already. So I felt like 2 is fine for this mini engine. First of all, it can get your plays started with a Swordsoul, and also it can get your Swordsoul play started literally by the fact this is a special summonable level 4 tuner from your hand, so you can combine this with any of the level 4s you have. You can normal summon Pathfinder, you can normal summon Squatter, you can use the Tenyis and then start the Swordsoul plays literally by going into Grandmaster, which is also quite nice. Talking about Swordsoul plays, Strategist is obviously I think a must play in any worm deck these days. That is maybe not true Draco, because this card produces 1 negate and doesn't use up your normal summon, so I feel like this card is quite nice. Also burns your opponent, which is easier to OTK them actually, which is one of the things that work quite well in conjunction with the Giant Ballpark. Sadly, it doesn't put it down, your opponent down to 6,000, which would have been great, but I mean a 2,000 burn on this specific card as well would probably be quite strong. Then we run a triple Tenyi Spirit Vishuda. Very good going second, annoys your opponent very, very much. Plus you can get your Kaiju back to your hand, so loop your Kaiju a little bit, which is always fun. Ashuna, yeah, this card is a bit problematic. Usually it's like a good card. If you just want to do your Tenyi plays or your Swordsoul plays, then it's fine. But if you have this card and Ballpark, it's a bit problematic because it locks you into summoning worm monsters, which mean you can't use the summon effect of Ballpark, which is the only effect that actually matters. So make sure you don't use if you want to use Ballpark, don't use the effect of this card till after you've used Ballpark. That's all I can say. So I tried to cut this card down to 2. You could possibly run on Mirror instead if you like, because there's plenty of ways to send Mirror actually to the graveyard if you do want to, but I felt like the Tenyi Spirit, at least summoning it and sending a card, sending it to the graveyard, also still works with Taia. And in the circumstances where you won't have Ballpark, this card is actually still pretty good. We run a 2 Gadarla. First of all, this is an insect monster, so it works with different things like recycling it with Picofalena, for example. And yeah, it's a cheap Kaiju, I always say that. And this is probably one of the better ones if you are on a budget. 1 Terraforming is a must in this deck, obviously, because we're playing a field spell deck, and this is the playmaker of this deck, besides the whole Swordsoul thing. And that is because you can summon out basically 3 normal monsters during the battle phase, which can be quite nice, or you can summon 1 out with the whole Gokipole thing and pop one of your opponent's monsters, which is quite nice. And technically it has a second effect that if a monster you control is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon 1 insect normal monster from your graveyard. not just in insect monster would have been like a lot better, but possibly even like borderline too strong. I don't know. Not these days, but at the point where it came out. Now you can get one level 4 normal monster back on board, which is like, I don't know, it's a body block, I guess. Other than that, it's still fine. Plus it helps you if you go in second. If your opponent gets rid of certain stuff on your field during your turn, then you can use that effect and maybe go into rank 4, for example. Forbidden Chalice, very good card. It helps you go in first if you want, because this deck can go first, obviously, because that's Tenyi Swordsoul stuff, and it's a very good card on a budget going second. You can obviously swap this out for good hand traps, but I don't hate it. If you don't have any of the other ones, by the way, you could always run Triple Book of Moon as well. It's not as good as the hand traps, but it is an option that you have. Forbidden Droplet, a card that can send stuff to the graveyard like Gokipole, which activates its effect. Tenyi stuff to the graveyard, which can be helpful, and obviously it can kind of get rid of your opponent's board to a certain extent, so keep that in mind. Heavily Dragon Circle at 2. Same thing as with Ecclesia, you don't really want to see it at 3 in your hand. It can be a bit bricky, but you can send it to the graveyard with Shaman of the Tenyi, for example, or even with a Forbidden Droplet. Then this card gets its second effect, which is quite nice. You can search a Tenyi. And other than that, you can add one worm monster to your hand, which is quite nice, because you can get Strategist, for example, or you can always like chain this since it's a quick effect. If your opponent gets rid of one of your Tenyi monsters anyway, then you can still tribute it and start a different kind of combo. So I like this card at 2 in the deck. And Impermanence, because it's a very good hand trap. For the extra deck, one Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, because you can easily make level 8 synchros in this deck. Problem is, well, it's not a cheap card, and there's probably better level 8 synchros that you can play. I like it because it's a go second deck and you can nuke your opponent's board, which is quite important in this deck. Plus do some burn damage, and with this burn damage, hopefully if you have a ballpark on your board, you can actually finish games, because it might put your opponent down. If you destroy 4 monsters for some reason, then you could put your opponent in range of finishing them off literally just by running 3 of the black squatters into them. So that's quite nice. One of the bigger playmakers is Swordsoul Grandmaster. This card is very good, search to your Swordsoul stuff, and also is a negate, so you definitely want to be running this. And as the level 10, you run Baronne de Fleur. If you have the Swordsoul one, you can obviously run it, maybe cut one. I don't know, there's cards to cut if you really want to, but this card works since you can always use the effect to tag out as well. You have possibly access to this card a bit more often than you want. Tornado Dragon is very important in this deck. Usually I don't like running this as a UR, because this card, well, it's not great, but in this scenario it's okay, because it's a worm monster and you can still special summon it after you use Tenyi Spirit Ashuna, and this card also has spell trap removal, which is very important because that's basically the only that you have. Bagooska, very good to rank for stalling after your ballpark plays, so your opponent possibly can't make a comeback. That can be helpful from time to time. Exosister Asophiel, because you can bounce cards from your opponent to your hand, and you can bounce your Kaiju back, so you could loop that. And Link Spider, if you happen to draw 2 shiny Black Sea Squatters, or if you want to get one of them into your graveyard, so you can use Picofalena, for example, that can be helpful from time to time. Then go into Link 3 or Link 4. Monk of the Tenyi for the Tenyi plays. This card, not so much for its first effect, but since it's a discard, you can tag one other insect monster. That's a bit problematic, but technically it's possible. The thing is, if you have it only makes really sense if you use your Kaiju for one of the things after you've used the ballpark effect and you have a Kaiju on your side of the field for some reason, which is possible with Baron, or if you draw both Kaijus, then that's a possibility. But then you could equip Gokipole, link off, then use Gokipole's effect and send a card. But the thing is, usually you already have all your 3 out of the deck, so it won't actually come up. It's mainly if you need a discard and you want to discard stuff like Heavenly Dragon Circle, for example, then that can come up, but it's mainly the second effect because of target 3 insect monsters in the graveyard, shuffle them into deck and draw a card, so you can reset your ballpark. You could run technically 2 of this card, so you can keep the loop going, but obviously it's a budget deck, so I didn't want to. LANphorhynchus can be quite nice because it's a non-effect monster and you get it for free. Shaman of the Tenyi, not necessary in this specific deck, but can be quite nice. Watch out though, for the rest of the turn you cannot activate the effect of monster special summon from the extra deck except Tenyi monsters. You can still special summon them, but you cannot use the effect, which means something for Tornado Dragon, for example, if you for some reason do the Swordsoul plays after you do the Tenyi plays. we run 2 Berserker of Tenyi. You probably would get away with running 1, but since there's not much more budgety friendly that would put into the extra deck, I felt like running 2 won't harm, and 1 Rasterliger because it's a good link 4, but a better one would be stuff like Unchained Abomination, for example. Obviously, you can always run stuff like Nightmare Phoenix, can help you, it's a go second deck. Other honorable mentions for the deck, Lightning Storm, a card that would probably work, technically Called by the Grave, but it's not as useful as other cards would be in this specific scenario. Gaga Cowboy to finish the game, very, very important. Abyss Dweller, a card that can shut down your further opponent's plays if they have lots of resources in the graveyard, which lots of the decks do. So this card can actually help you stop your opponent from recovering the next turn, and then you go on. Exeter Knight is a card. It doesn't really do that much because it also nukes your board, and you don't really want that. So mention it, but not that great. And in theory, Supernatural Danger Zone, because if a non-effect monster is special summoned, even tokens, so it technically would work with the Swordsoul stuff, and it works with your squatter, and it works with your link monsters. You could pop 1 card your opponent controls, so this is technically nice. You could run it at 1 in this deck because you will be summoning non-effect monsters, very, very much actually. But I didn't want to include it because this is super rare, and I felt like sometimes when you draw it, it just does nothing in comparison to like an actual card that does stuff. So that's always the problem with these continuous. Oh, technically it's a lot of resource gain over time, but it actually isn't, because yeah, in Yu-Gi-Oh these days you need like instant access to plays, and not like, oh yeah, in like 2 or 3 turns this might be paying off. Otherwise everyone would be running stuff like Future Fusion, but yeah, doesn't do these kind of things anymore. So instant payoff is better than something like this, I feel. That was the deck profile. Hope you enjoyed it. Obviously, it's not the most competitive deck, but that is, I feel like, a playable version of Giant Ballpark.